My topic that is called From Liberator to Settler. This is a subtitle, and the whole topic of my dissertation is Informal Jewish Space in Post-War years in Kaliningrad. So this report represents a part of an ongoing research to a PhD project under this title. By post-war years, I consider the time period around 1945-1960s. But what do we mean under the word informal, and what is space? These two significant words together describe Jewish presence in Kaliningrad before the Jewish community was established officially and the Jews were somehow organized. As there were no Jewish institutions officially, we can only use this word space actually to describe correctly the Jewish presence at that time. The topic itself is indeed quite narrow and local, as you can see. It represents a small puzzle from the big picture of Soviet times, but despite this, it's important to reconstruct the facts from those times, not only for the history of Kaliningrad, not only for the history of Jewish community, but also to look through this prism at the Soviet Jewry in general and to compare and refer to the whole map of Soviet Jews. Kaliningrad region is a unique place. First of all, because of the nation replacement. By that we mean when the whole former population of Königsberg was deported and substituted by new settlers from USSR. Second, those who came as new settlers there, they had to decide how to build their future, either using their old pre-war background of knowledge or forgetting the past and creating completely new space for them. So Soviet Jews who were among new Soviet settlers, they were put in a sterile place. They were unrooted from their family history, and the Jewish community of Königsberg at that time didn't exist, obviously, anymore. So the connection to Judean Jewish values was damaged for them. So let's look at the way of migration, how Jewish settlers appeared in Kaliningrad after the World War II. So the story of the Soviet Jews who took hold on the territory of the former East Prussia in the city Königsberg, and that was later renamed after one of the famous Soviet politicians of that time, Kaliningrad, begins with the Red Army invasion. I have some pictures for you to see. Basically, these were the typical soldiers who came the first time to Kaliningrad. In fact, among multinational divisions gathered from the whole territory of the Soviet Union, there were some soldiers and high-rank officers with Jewish identity. Before the wave of Soviet settlers arriving by their own initiative or state assignment, first Jewish evidence was brought by military forces, which represents a separate pattern in the migration. The tendency in the relevant researchers of Soviet Jewry reveals that Soviet environment and current politics of the state demolished strong Jewish affiliation of its citizens, making next generations disconnected from their traditions and roots. Later, Stalin showed his anti-Semitic attitude in full power, but during the war, actually Jewish soldiers, they felt quiet and did not experience any anti-Semitic encounters among their peers. So they voluntarily got recruited and put their lives on defending their country. Through the life stories, this paper analyzes how it was typical for Jewish liberators to build their life in post-war years in a new settlement in Kaliningrad. The theoretical research monitors only existing publications about Soviet Union Jews. However, to conduct a study, it was chosen to make face-to-face interviews, which gives a better understanding of life stories of first residents. Unfortunately, and as you know, all those military pioneers who were standing at the springs of Kaliningrad are not alive anymore, and therefore their kids were interviewed on the account of family memoirs. And besides that, they also belong to a target group of this research because they are people who were born in Kaliningrad in the families of early settlers in early post-war years. So the main goal of the study is to analyze patterns of migration to Kaliningrad among Jewish residents and to revive how they created an informal Jewish space on the territory of which Stalin wanted to keep religion-free and unrooted. So the first group of new Jewish residents was represented, as it was mentioned before, by soldiers who were fighting and liberating territories, and some of them served on the territory of former Königsberg or Kaliningrad. Next group of residents in this research is represented by the upcoming massive wave of specialists and people who, by their own will, decided to move to a new territory. So it would be completely different patterns of migration, and I'm not discussing it right now in this presentation. So before we go further to the life story of one of them, I would like to give you a short quotation about psychology of the soldiers, of Red Army soldiers. There is a very nice quotation that was published in the Journal of Contemporary History. So it was written, by the winter of 1941, with the Battle of Moscow behind them, German observers were describing the Red Army as the craftiest and most stubborn enemy that we have ever faced. If you want to resist a Russian-style attack, you will need strong nerves. And I suggest, sorry. I propose let's look precisely at one of the life stories. As an example, I want to introduce you Zema Plitman. He is a very good example of a new Jewish settler. I took him by purpose. It's very easy to talk about famous doctors, famous professors, and other prominent people, but Zema was just a soldier, and later on he became just a constructor. He came from a lower class. But still, we have to remember about such people who revived the city, who put their lives on it. So Zema was born in Ukraine in 1918. He became honored personality in Kaliningrad years after, of course. And he made his way as Jewish soldier and liberator, but after the war he decided to stay in Kaliningrad. So this example, which was not an isolated case, illustrates how Jews gained a foothold in the city after 1945 and to what extent they were to form the basis for the Jewish population group. In this paper, I want to answer on one question. Did the migration influence actually on the Jewish identity and behavior of the Jewish settlers in Kaliningrad? So let's learn about this inspiring life story and why it was taken as an example. He was born, as I said, in Ukraine, in Zaporozhye, in a small village, Maidov. So imagine a life in a small village. This village was founded by a joint organization. He lived with his mother, father, and another 6 siblings. His family was completely secular, although both parents were Jewish. Suddenly, his father died, and right after his mother. 7 siblings became orphans, and it was the oldest sister who was supposed to take care of him and who raised him. From early childhood, he learned how to work on the ground and take care of domestic animals. So as all typical Soviet young boys, he served in the Red Army, and his military service was in Far East region, so which is quite far from his home. And on the way back, he heard terrible news that the war started, so he was recruited back, and he continued his service, and he went through the whole war. He finished the war in Berlin, and besides that, he was a participant in Königsberg's assault in April 1945, which really impressed him and for his entire life. Years after, he settled there, but before that, there was a chain of significant events which led him to this migration. It was 1945, end of the war, when their group their division was relocated back and settled in Belarus. As from that moment, their artillery regiment was based there. In Belarus, he met his future wife, with whom he fell in love from the first sight. By coincidence, his commander, Gurhovsky, was also Jewish, who made a shidduch, a traditional Jewish matchmaking between Zama and a young Jewish beauty named Feigele. She came from a Jewish Orthodox family where everyone observed Shabbat traditions before the war, and the girl was quite educated. She studied at the Jewish school and finished 7 classes. She was very intelligent, and she wouldn't even think to marry a Russian man, as in her family the traditions were very, very strict obeyed. So in the beginning, newly married couple lived calm and happily in Belarus, but soon they got their firstborn Lonichka, or how they called him at home Laser, in memory of Zama's father. After Laser, they got another baby girl, Sonia, which was born 2 years after. Later, it turned out it was not comfortable and pleasant to live in this place anymore for this young Jewish family. So the reason was anti-Semitism. Jews were not very much favored in that area, especially those who returned back. So the Jews who returned back, they faced a dramatic picture. Their houses were occupied by neighbors, and their family was murdered in ghetto, for example. So it was, so the life turned into nightmare for them. So when Delone was 7 and Sonia 5, the family took a firm decision to move out for a better life. The mother's aunt, by that time, migrated from Vilna to Kaliningrad, and it was 1949, and wrote them a wonderful letter about her new life in Kaliningrad, that there was plenty of work, plenty of food, and that many specialists arrived to this beautiful city. So if you remember the life in general, it was difficult in post-war years in Soviet Union, and like the food could be received only upon presenting food cards. So Plitmans had no doubt anymore in their relocation. So the aunt's motivation to move was very simple. She didn't have anyone alive to return to. So she was young and full of energy. She managed to escape. She was evacuated, but the rest of the family didn't. After these letters, first moved Zama in 1953. He got a job in a construction department in the fishing industry, and then the whole family reunited. They got a household and a cow, chickens and goose, which they brought from Belarus. As all settlers of that time, they arrived in the freight car directly to Kaliningrad. As all new settlers, they remember that the city was still in ruins. That's why specialists and working power were needed to revive it. It's a common case for the new settlers to arrive in the city where they had a connection. In this case, it was a close relative who hosted them for the first time and provided with the information before that. So young boy Leone was 7, and he was obliged to attend his first grade already. In the free time, pupils were engaged in the ruin cleaning. The bricks were later sent to the big Russia to restore some other cities that were heavily damaged. So the son of Zama remembered some anti-Semitic tendencies in the society, that he was called a Żyd or Żydowska morda among his peers or classmates, literally which means Jew. But he kicked anyone who addressed such phrases to him. Besides such cases, everything was quite calm, and the situation was more or less stable and much better in Kaliningrad. So the son of Zama, Leonid, remembers from his early childhood and family memoirs where both parents were Jewish, with strong Jewish identity. They did not change their names the whole life. But they did not live by Jewish laws, did not practice traditions. However, somehow they knew when was Pesach and always got matzot for the holiday from Vilnius. Besides that, they never do anything else. Both Zama and Feika, they spoke Yiddish between each other when they wanted to discuss something secretly. But their kids were very much embarrassed, and when they heard Jewish language, they asked their parents not to discredit them in front of friends. So they lived a simple life as many other Soviet people. They used to eat pork, raise 3 pigs, at their household, although the mother was very educated and told a lot of things about Shabbat preparations, etc., to their kids. So Zama didn't like to talk about war and avoided this topic. Although he was a very honored person and a frontline soldier, he was honored as a veteran who was granted 2 Red Star orders. Only by the end of his days, he started to talk slowly a little about it. Before it, he felt only humiliation. From his words, soldiers lived as animals. They did not have any conditions and rights. So only after he retired, he remembered his peers, and among them, apparently, there were many Jews. But still, he never got into details. So the main serious reason for that is that for many years he believed he lost his entire family during the war. This led him never to return back to his home village. And this is the common story of other people as well who came to Kaliningrad as early settlers, knowing they lost everyone. Kaliningrad was just a city where they started a new page of their life. After Zama moved to Kaliningrad, he got few very close friends, and apparently they were also Jewish. There was a very strong Jewish network among new settlers who were ready to help each other anytime. However, they all belonged to the same social level as he did. They were construction workers. Mother Fega worked in a shoe repair, and she had similar colleagues. So in fact, in post-war times, many Jews were engaged in the city revival, and such groups of Jewish companies were quite common. So one more interesting fact about Zama. After the war, his wife's relatives, they moved back to Poland. And from there, they wanted to move to Israel or Canada. It was 1957, and they wanted to invite their relative Fega with them. But he got so angry, he stated that it was his home, he liberated this land, and he wants to live only there. So to summarize this story, I would like to mention certain points. Yeah, here you can see his note when he applied to the party, and this is how he looked when he was already mature. So just to summarize this life story, I would like to mention some points. That Zama had a strong Jewish identity his entire life, and he did not change it. Although he didn't express it widely, he taught his children to marry only Jews. So he was a typical Jewish settler of early years, and a real hard worker and a patriot who dedicated his life to revive Kaliningrad. And from his memoirs, we can see that hidden Jewish network did exist. That's it. Thank you.